Saadia, looking through this report, 84% of respondents said that they were worried or concerned about the outlook for the world. Is it so much about the risks we are facing or the idea that we may not see a coordinated joint effort to respond to joint challenges?
Thanks for having me. Not only are 84% deeply concerned, but only 4% are optimistic about the outlook for the world. So we're talking about very few numbers that think that there's going to be a silver lining out of this crisis. And I think the reason behind that is that we're started seeing this perfect storm of economic crisis, coupled with the health-related crisis, coupled with this long-term looming threat of climate change and the fear that we will not act fast enough, all of that coming together. And of course, that's leading to the biggest problem that we're currently seeing, the risk that worsened the most since the start of the pandemic, which is social cohesion breaking down. So you're seeing all of these things happen together. And of course, most people have seen that while governments have focused inward, and some have done extremely well in managing this crisis, most have not really collaborated across borders. That's why we're not seeing adequate provision of vaccines. That's why we're not seeing as much progress towards managing the climate crisis as we should. And that's what's leading to these results.
Well, Saadia, when we talk about the pandemic crisis in particular, this report really focuses on the divergence in the recovery. What are the consequences of that?
So it's very clear that when you look at global income and you look at the top 20% richest people in the world, they've been able to recover about half of their losses in the last couple of years. And when you look at the lowest 20%, the poorest 20% in the world, they have further lost another 5% of their income. So we're talking about this bifurcation when it comes to income, and it's only going to get worse unless we take some action. So for example, 3.6 billion people across the world that still don't have access to the internet. So while many have been able to find new ways of earning a livelihood, there are many others who simply don't have that avenue available to them. So the consequence is further social fractures, which then make governments focus even more inward, even more in the short term, and that doesn't allow them to focus on one of the biggest areas that requires global cooperation and long-term thinking, and that's climate.
Yes, and we're going to certainly talk more about climate with one of the co-authors of the report, or another voice behind the report, a little bit later on. Saadia, good morning to you. It's interesting to see the report go beyond just the tragic loss of life that COVID-19 involves and dive into some of the other factors. But thinking more geopolitically, because there are some of those risks in here as well, there's talk of geo-economic confrontations as we see some of the world's largest economies coming at things from such different perspectives and demonstrating perhaps a lack of coordination and a lack of cooperation. Is there any reason, do you see any reasons to be hopeful at all in the years ahead that will change?
I think we do see areas where various governments can cooperate with each other. I mean, certainly there is now starting to be progress around better distribution of vaccinations. If we think about the creation of the vaccine, that was a win for science, that was a win for global cooperation, and that was a win for the business sector and the government sector working together. So we know that it is possible, and I think there are several areas where there can be areas for global cooperation between some of those largest economies where there is a common interest. The United States, China, some of the other largest economies in the world all have a common interest in dealing with climate change. And that's where I think there is, again, an avenue for cooperation.
In what way? I mean, is there a certain point? I notice almost all of the risks are climate change related, from climate action failure, extreme weather, biodiversity loss. You could maybe even add infectious disease in there, human environmental damage, natural resource crises. These are all climate related issues that kind of send the message, we've missed the curve. Is it time to brace for impact? Rather than worrying about stopping it, do we try and deal with it at this point?
No, I think it's very clear coming out of Glasgow that a lot more effort needs to be done, and going below 2 degrees is still possible for the world to achieve.
But isn't it clear that it's not being done, Saadia? Because after the U.S. came out of Glasgow, or even before the president came back from Glasgow, he was already on the phone with Saudi Arabia saying, please pump more oil. So clearly we're not doing the things that need to be done.
So this is exactly the risks that the report is pointing to. In the short term, you do have rising energy prices, you do have a concern around inflation, you do have a concern around asset bubbles, and that's what's coming through in the 2 to 5 year time frame when you look at the results of the report. It's in the longer term that people are very cognizant of the fact that the biggest existential threat is around climate. And the reason why some of those actions are not being taken fast enough is those very short-term concerns, not just the pandemic, but also the crisis around education, the crisis around jobs, the crisis around mental health and youth disillusionment. So clearly, if governments continue to focus only on the short-term concerns without thinking about the long-term resilience that they have to put in place, then yes, we will not take action fast enough. And that's what the report's aiming to call out.